Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, we like to keep our finger on the pulse of all things AI, right? But today we're diving into a company that's been kind of flying under the radar a bit.
Yeah, they've been very quietly making some really big moves.
Exactly. And that company is Mistral AI, a French startup that's been shaking things up and might just be on track to become a major player in this whole AI race.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch.
So today we're going to break down just what Mistral AI is all about, how they're approaching AI differently, especially with their big focus on open source and how they're taking on the giants like OpenAI and Anthropic. Oh, and of course we can't forget about that massive €100 million deal they just struck with CGM.
That was a big one.
For this deep dive, we've got a really interesting mix of sources, in-depth tech blogs, a really insightful YouTube video that analyzes their AI models, and a bunch of news articles that track all their funding rounds and partnerships.
So we're going to try to piece it all together, and really get a sense of what Mistral AI is all about, what their strategy is, and what they mean for the future of AI, especially in Europe.
And especially since, Europe has been pretty vocal about wanting to establish its own strong AI presence on the global stage.
Yeah, trying to gain a bit of that sovereignty.
Right. So Mistral AI might just be their champion. At least that's what some folks are saying. So let's start with the basics. Mistral AI was founded just last year, in April 2023, by some serious AI heavy hitters. I mean, we're talking about people who came from Google DeepMind and Meta. And get this. By June of this year, 2024, they hit a valuation of 5.8 billion euros.
Yeah, that's huge.
It is. So, what does that tell us? That kind of growth, that kind of valuation so early on, it's got to be saying something right.
It definitely says a lot about investor confidence. They see something in Mistral, something big. I think it really signals that people recognize their potential to disrupt the industry, especially with their whole open source approach. They're going up against companies like OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic, who've been keeping their models pretty close to the vest.
Right, and their proprietary nature has caused some concerns.
Definitely, and that's where Mistral comes in. They're doing things very differently.
And that open source commitment is really at the heart of what they're doing, right? They call it a radically open approach. Now, for those of us who aren't, deep in the AI weeds, what does that actually mean in practice? Like, how is that different from what companies like OpenAI are doing?
So you know how with a company like OpenAI, you basically get access to their AI models through an API.
Right, kind of like renting software.
Yeah, exactly. You can use it, but you don't actually see the code, the inner workings. Mistral flips that on its head. They release their models as open weights, which basically means the code is out there in the open for anyone to see, use, modify, integrate. No API restrictions, no crazy licensing fees.
So it's more like instead of just being able to use the software, you can actually tinker with the engine under the hood.
Exactly. It gives developers so much more control and flexibility. It's like the difference between subscribing to a streaming service versus owning the Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Right? With streaming, you're limited to what they offer, but with the Blu-ray, you can watch it however and whenever you want.
Okay, I like that analogy. So you have full control, but the next question is, what are they actually offering? They have Mistral 7B, which I hear is pretty powerful, even though it's compact. And then there's Mistral, which I guess is all about efficiency and performance.
Yeah, Mistral 7B is a great example of how they're managing to get a lot of power out of a relatively small package. And then Mistral, yeah, that's their Mixture Experts model. They're really focusing on making sure it can perform at the top level without breaking the bank.
And then we have to talk about Mistral Small 3.1.
Yeah, that's their latest and greatest.
There's a ton of buzz around that one.
And rightfully so. That YouTube video we were talking about really breaks down just how good it is. Like, it's apparently beating out models like Google's Gemma 3, even holding its own against GPT-4 Mini in some benchmarks. And get this, it has a 128K token window. That's massive.
Wow, so what does that mean for someone like me?
Well, it means it has a huge working memory.
Yeah.
It can process and understand much longer pieces of text, like really long documents or complex conversations, all in one go. And it's fast too, like 150 tokens per second, so it's really responsive.
That's impressive. And it's not just text, right? We saw it handling images and doing basic coding tasks in that video. It even tried to clone a website from just a screenshot.
Yeah, the multimodal aspect is huge. It can deal with images, text, who knows what else they'll add in the future. And the coding stuff, well, that's really interesting because it shows just how versatile this model is. Sure, it might not be at the level of something like Gemini for super complex coding, but it's still early days.
Yeah, and it's ridiculously cheap to use on platforms like OpenRouter. And the fact that you can even host it locally with tools like Ollama, that's a big deal for anyone who's worried about data privacy or needs to work offline.
It is. That's a huge part of their appeal. They're making this powerful AI technology accessible to everyone, not just the big companies with deep pockets.
And that kind of shifts the power dynamic, right?
Yeah.
No more being tied to these big tech ecosystems. You have more control over your data, over how you use AI.
Right. And that plays really well into Europe's concerns about data privacy, especially with all the regulations they have in place.
Right. Europe wants to keep their data close.
Exactly. And Mistral being able to be deployed locally, that really fits in with that whole philosophy.
So it's not just about the tech, it's about the philosophy behind it. And speaking of philosophy, let's talk money. I mean, over $600 million raised so far. That's going to be one of the biggest, fastest funding rises we've seen in the AI space. Tell me about those funding rounds.
Yeah, it's been pretty remarkable. They kicked things off with a seed round of $112 million back in June 2023, which is, by the way, the biggest seed round ever in Europe. That gave them a valuation of $260 million right out of the gate.
Not bad for a starting point.
Not bad at all. And then just 6 months later, they closed a Series O funding round for 385 million euros, boosting their valuation to about $2 billion.
And they didn't stop there, did they?
Nope. Just this past June, they secured another 600 million euros in funding, pushing that valuation up to 5.8 billion.
That's wild. And it's not just the amount of money, it's also who's investing. Lightspeed Venture Partners, General Catalyst, NVIDIA, Microsoft, and of course CMA, CGM. These aren't just random investors, they're making a statement by backing Mistral.
Yeah, they're placing their bets on the open source future that Mistral is building. And that Microsoft partnership is particularly interesting because they're heavily invested in OpenAI, so for them to also throw their weight behind Mistral, that says something.
Right. They must see something special there. And that brings us to the big one. The €100 million partnership with CMA CGM, one of the world's leading shipping and logistics companies. That was announced just this past April. What's the scoop on that deal? What are they hoping to achieve?
Well, this is a 5-year partnership, and it's pretty comprehensive. First off, Mistral is going to be developing some custom AI solutions for CMA CGM to really boost their customer service operations. Streamlining things, making everything more efficient.
Yeah, make those cargo ships run even smoother.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just shipping, too.
Right. They're also going to be working on some AI-driven fact-checking tools for CMA CGM's media outlets, including BFM TV.
Yeah, that's a big one, especially with all the concerns about misinformation these days. This partnership is a really good example of how Mistral's AI can be applied in so many different areas. And it's not a small investment for CMA CGM either. They're planning to invest 500 million euros in AI across their whole business. So this partnership with Mistral is a big part of that.
So it's safe to say CMA CGM is all in on AI, and they're betting on Mistral to help them lead the way. It's interesting, right? I mean, we're seeing Mistral being talked about as Europe's answer to the US dominance in AI, specifically when it comes to open source. Do you think that's an accurate assessment?
Yeah, I think it's definitely part of the narrative here. Europe wants to be a major player in AI, and they want to do it their way, which means focusing on things like data privacy and ethical considerations. And they've been pretty vocal about that.
Right. They don't necessarily want to follow the Silicon Valley model.
Exactly. And Mistral, with its open source approach and its commitment to those European values, fits that bill perfectly.
And they have the support of the French government too, right? I mean, even President Macron has been talking about Mistral's AI chat assistant, Le Chat.
Yeah, he's definitely given them a thumbs up. I think it's a strategic move for Europe. They want to reduce their dependence on technology coming from outside the continent, especially from the US. They want to have their own AI champions, and Mistral seems to be at the top of that list.
Yeah, they're trying to carve out their own space in this global AI race. It's almost like they're saying, look, we can do it too, and we're going to do it differently.
Yeah.
And, their CEO, Arthur Mensch, he's been pretty outspoken about his belief in open source development, saying that it'll lead to faster progress because it brings more people into the fold.
Yeah, the idea is that if you make the technology more accessible, you get more people contributing, more ideas flowing, and ultimately that leads to faster innovation.
And potentially even better AI systems. So it's not just a technology play, it's a philosophical one as well. Okay, so we have Mistral, this European champion of open source AI, going up against the big dogs, OpenAI and Anthropic, who've built their businesses on proprietary models. How do those two approaches clash? What are the key differences?
Well, the most obvious difference is in their business models. OpenAI and Anthropic, they're mostly about subscriptions and licensing, right?
Yeah.
You pay to access their AI. Mistral, on the other hand, they're pushing for this more decentralized, distributed model where anyone can access and use their technology. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about AI development and deployment.
And it's a gamble, right? I mean, can they actually compete with the big guys in the long run?
It's definitely a challenge. They have a lot of ground to cover, and their current market share is still relatively small compared to the established players. But their valuation suggests that a lot of people believe in their vision and their partnerships, especially that one with CGM, are bringing in some serious revenue.
Right. It shows that their technology can be applied in real-world situations and that they can attract big clients. But they still have a long way to go.
Yeah, no doubt about it. They need to keep innovating, keep building their ecosystem, keep attracting talent and investment. And they're not shying away from that challenge. They have some ambitious plans for the future, scaling up their models, developing enterprise solutions, working with policymakers to shape AI regulations. They're aiming for the top.
And their CEO has said that they're not interested in selling out and that they're planning for an IPO, which, given their valuation, wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah, that IPO would be a major milestone for them and for Europe. It would really solidify their position as a leader in the global AI landscape.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Mistral AI, this stealthy French startup, is making waves. They've grown incredibly fast. They're challenging the traditional way of doing things with their open source approach, and they're attracting some serious attention and investment.
Yeah, they're definitely one to watch. They're a force to be reckoned with.
So the big question is, what happens next? Will open source become the dominant model for AI development? Will Mistral be able to hold their own against the giants? And what does all this mean for the future of AI, especially in Europe?
Those are the questions we'll be exploring in the coming months and years. And I, for one, am excited to see how it all unfolds. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
What are your thoughts on today's topic? I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay blessed.